Look at us so very easy. My name is Laura, and sometimes we just need a quick, fun, silly, cuddly project, and I have just the perfect thing for that. The Silly Cuddly Monster Pillow is from Shannon Fabrics. It's a free pattern. I'll put a link in the description. And we're going to use some Cuddle fabric. And that orange is a beautiful dimple orange. It actually has these little dimples on it, which is going to make it a great texture. And we need some scrap fabric for the face. We also will need 2 pieces of scrap batting at about a 14-inch square. The directions have the actual size for the face features. We have a mouth, horn, tongue, eyes, and teeth. But for the entire face, we need to cut a 13-inch circle. Or you can use this back pattern and copy it at 160%. And that's going to give us that 13-inch pillow. When sewing a Cuddle stretch knit fabric, I would recommend a stretch knit needle at 90-14 and a walking foot will be helpful if you have one. Another helpful hint while sewing this Cuddle fabric is to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance and make your stitches a lot bigger. Instead of a 2.5, do a 3.5. And an all-purpose polyester thread will be just fine. Let's start with the orange fabric. The first thing we need to do is cut a 2-strip by 40 inches. We're going to put that aside, and that's going to be the sides of the pillow. The next thing we need to do is cut out that 13-inch circle. For my circle, I used a seam gauge. I put a pin in the one and had 6.5 inches, and then just drew all the way around to get my 13-inch circle. I drew the circle on the back of the fabric, and I've put right sides together, and I'm going to cut out both circles at the same time. Once those 2 circles are cut out, we can do the face pieces. We can cut out all of these pieces and use them as templates. And because I have my orange out, I'm going to do the mouth first. Keep your right sides together and trace out the mouth. Once the shape has been traced, I can pin those layers together. And before I trim off any of the seam allowance, I'm going to do my stitching. And I need to stitch the bottom of that mouth, going from corner to corner. Once that one edge has been stitched, I'm going to be able to cut this piece out, leaving at least a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It is easier to stitch and cut out a larger piece and then make it smaller. From here, we're going to be able to turn this piece right side out. A little blue strip needs to be stitched along the top. We will need the blue cut at 1.5 inches at about 14 inches long. Do a little zigzag to hold this top edge together. Match the right sides together. Leave a little bit on one end and just stitch this all the way around. You're going to have a little bit on the other end. Once that trim's been put on, we're going to be able to take that blue piece and just turn it around to the back side. You can tuck a little bit of those corners in and then stitch in the ditch so you anchor that bottom piece down. My silly mouth is now done. Since we have the blue out, let's do the horns. We need to make 2 horns, so place fabrics right side together, and we need to trace this horn out twice. Do it on a larger piece, and then we can stitch around both those long sides, leaving the bottom open. Then we can trim the piece out, leaving a nice 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once those horns have been stitched, we can turn them right side out. They will need stuffing, but we can stuff them when we stuff the pillow. From the red, we need to cut out a tongue. Place right sides together, trace around your shape, stitch along that line, and leave that small end open. When that's trimmed, we can turn that right side out. Roll those seams so they all come to the edge, and then do a row of stitching right down the center. The tongue is now done. We need to do the eyes and the teeth. I'm going to draw the largest eye first. Now I can cut out the next size. And I can cut out my 2 circles by following the placement on the picture, and we need to applique those on. A little zigzag stitch around that will be just fine. With the eyes done, we need to trace out the teeth on the back side of the white. I have all of the parts done. Now I can put his face together. By laying this out first, we're going to make sure that the teeth are coming outside of the mouth. Now I can take his mouth off and applique with a little zigzag around the eyes and the teeth. The Cuddle fabric is very forgiving. The stitches just blend right in. So if you go off a little, you won't even notice it. We have the mouth and the tongue left to put on. So decide where you want that tongue and do a zigzag to hold that tongue down. And the last thing we need to stitch down is that very first stitch we did around the bottom of the mouth. Once the face has been stitched on, we're going to be able to stabilize it with some quilt batting. Place both the pillow front and the pillow back onto the batting. Do a zigzag all the way around both pieces just to secure that batting on. This is just going to help stabilize the pillow. Once the batting is on, do a straight stitch around the mouth, around the eyes, and a little bit around the teeth. This is going to give it a lot of body. Once all that stitching's been done, we can trim off the extra batting. To sew these 2 circles together, we're going to use that first piece that we cut out, which was 2 inches by about 40 inches. Start a little bit in this fabric and stitch all the way around, having this long piece go around the circle. When you come to the end, stop where you've stitched and leave a little piece. And for strength, use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. With that little piece stitched all the way around, we'll be able to take those 2 ends, fold them together, move the face out of the way, and just stitch that closed. And that stitch line is going to finish that outside. We need to stitch this piece now on to the other side of the pillow. Leave a little opening near the bottom because we need to turn this right side out. Pin your layers together and then stitch all the way around. With that opening, we can turn this right side out. That little strip has made the head a little bit wider, so it's going to have more of a round shape and not a point. Now we can put some fill in there. Once the pillow has been stuffed, we can stuff the 2 horns. We can now close up the seam and put on the horns. We can do a ladder stitch to close this off. A ladder stitch, you're going to go down. When you hit this layer, you're going to go sideways and then up. Sideways, down, sideways, up. So you're not making a loop. You're running along the edge and then going up, running along the edge. I'm going to use blue thread, but by all means, use a matching color. My first stitch comes up, and then straight in line, I'm going to go in and then across. Next stitch is going to go straight up. You can see where that thread wants to go straight. Run along the back, then the next stitch, you'll want to do straight down. As you're stitching, you can see those straight lines. After a few stitches, you're going to be able to pull, and that seam is going to tighten up, and the seam allowance is going to go inside. To tie a knot, pick up a little piece of fabric, and then take that thread that's coming out of the fabric and wrap it around the point of the needle. Once, twice, even 3 times. Hold that taut and pull. And that's going to make a nice knot. Then we can just take this, pull it through another area, pull that tight, trim off the thread, and that thread is going to be inside. and you don't see the ladder stitch at all. The horn is going to get sewn on this little piece that we put between the pillows. Once we have the placement, we will use the same ladder stitch. Pick up a little bit of the orange, then pick up a little bit of the blue. Pick up the orange, pick up the blue. Always doing this very straight ladder stitch. And that's going to pull that right in, and that seam allowance is going to get tucked inside. By stitching these horns on after, they do stay round. If we put them in the seam, they would have been very flat. And it wouldn't hurt to do 2 rows of stitching to really anchor those on. Our silly cuddly monster pillow is now done. Now that's a quick, fun, silly, cuddly project. I'll put a link in the description to the free pattern. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. And as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.